In the past few months, I've been participating to a number of debates on what has been called the Arab Spring. And I have to say that I was a bit frustrated by the fact that most discussants of the issue have been focusing mainly on politics and societies, as if economics was not going to play a key role. While I was preparing my little speech, I was imagining what I could say, and I said I don't have any recipe to sell, but probably what I can do more useful would be to put my hat as a European citizen and share with you some analysis of, let's say, political economy of ODA between, in particular, Europe and the Arab world. Because while looking at the Arab world, one at least in my position as a European, I cannot think about the impact that European policies have had, both on sustaining autocratic regimes in the Arab world, notwithstanding the fact that European policies have been paying lip services to their efforts to democratization on the one side, and on the other side, I think that if we look a little bit at the instruments that have been set in place, we could think about potentialities for the future in terms of the role that ODA could play. So, let me, to begin with, look back a little bit to what have been the instruments of the European Union policies of the ODA towards the Arab world. I think there are three main phases. The first one, who began in the early 90s in the wake of the Oslo process, Oslo agreements, the so-called peace agreements between Israel and Palestine, set a particular euphoria for a new vision for a Euro-Mediterranean partnership. The so-called Barcelona process was basically built on three main pillars that were economic cooperation and partnership, security partnership, and cultural partnership. In fact, during the 90s, what we saw was the strong accent put on economic cooperation, not much on security, and a little bit of blah, blah, blah on cultural cooperation. But the economic dimension of the partnership was particularly important for the European Union, or for the member states of the European Union, basically to enlarge their own markets and trading opportunities. What happened with September 11, 2001, this constituted an important watershed in terms of ODA policies, both for the European Union, but for the US as well. In the aftermath of the September 11, the US administration and basically the neoconservatives had a quite clear vision on how they could fight terror. Basically, the policy was to promote democratization in the Arab world, to fight corruption, to fight repression that was feeding unrest and Islamic fundamentalism. So the neoconservative policies of the two George Bush Jr. administrations had conceived democratization as a tool for promoting stability, conscious of the fact that economic development and economic growth had not materialized into clear democratization or political stability. The vision of the US was to impose a top-down vision of democracy. And the example is the campaign in Iraq starting in 2003 with all the failures and unsuccess that we know. But while the US were riding the horse of imposing democratization in the Middle East, the European Union was some way on the same line, but looking at new instruments, because basically the Euro-Mediterranean partnership had failed and was dying into the beginning of the Second Intifada in Palestine. So actually what happened starting from 2002 and 2003, the European Union began to think of how to extend the European Neighbourhood Policy that had applied to the Eastern European countries and far east from the European countries to countries like Moldova, Ukraine, etc., where successful changes had been put in place in terms of political change and democratization, was imagining to model a sort of a European neighborhood policy for the Mediterranean basin. The stick and the carrot didn't work the same way, in the sense that there was not an offer for a carrot of joining the European Union for the Eastern Mediterranean countries or Southern Mediterranean countries. Morocco had asked for entering the European Union in 1987 and didn't work, and the only two non-Arab countries on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean had asked for that. It was Israel, but never materialized in a clear project, and Turkey. For the other Arab countries, this was neither the objective of the Arab countries themselves, nor that of the European policy. So this European policy, how did it materialize, and how it worked in relation to the US policies of imposing democratization? The European policy was some way echoing the objective of promotion of democracy and human rights, mainly through the strengthening of the role of civil society in most of the Arab countries, while pursuing the objective of reinforcing basically the neoliberal project of trade liberalization and economic development for the single Arab states. Again, this new European policy of the extended Mediterranean neighboring policy failed, I would say, in terms of responding when we talk about conditionality, as you address the issue, and if we take the example of Egypt and Tunisia, while European member states were keen on developing economic agreement to foster their economic interest, sorry, but some water much needed in the Middle East is gone to my trousers. So it's a real waste of water.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
We should have the desert here.
Yes, unluckily. What basically happened.
Good luck.
Thank you. Was that in cases like Tunisia, 2007, GAFSA, when the trade unions and the workers were protesting against or fighting for their own rights, they were, thank you very much, they were basically repressed very violently by their own government, by the Tunisian government, and the European Union didn't raise their hand at all. In Egypt in 2005, during the elections, when the Muslim Brotherhood was hardly repressed by the Mubarak regime, not a single hand by the European Union came up to say, hey guys, you are not working democratically as we asked. They were a little bit vocal when they imprisoned Ayman Noor or with another academic, Saadetdin Ibrahim. Okay. Now, what I mean by that basically is that The policy of the European Union has been double-sided, priority to their own economic interest on the one side, with an official discourse that economic development was going to bring stability, democratization, political change, and blah, 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 which actually did not materialize in any sense. On the other side, we came to a third phase, starting from 2007, a very serious and some way crazy, I would say, one with the Union for the Mediterranean, the Sarkozy project, that actually sidelined all sorts of political and human rights issues by focusing exclusively on issues of economic partnership. Now, when we try to see not only the impact for the Arab world, but as well as for, thank you, for ODA, European and American policymakers, I think that Stefan Füle, the European Commissioner for European Enlargement, has addressed the issue in a very correct way. Let me just quote him 1 minute. Yes. Stefan Füle, in March of this year, he said, "We must show humility about the past. Europe was not vocal enough in defending human rights and local democratic forces in the region. Too many of us fell prey to the assumption that authoritarian regimes were a guarantee of stability in the region. This was not even realpolitik. It was, at best, short-termism, and the kind of short-termism that makes the long term even more difficult to build." I could not agree more. What kind of challenges, if we think to the future, can be there? Because some of the instruments of the European neighboring policy, I think, could be very much valid and very much help political change and democratization in the Arab world. The point is if they are applied or not. And the issue is that they were not applied. Only the economic part of the cake was on the table, and all the rest was quite left aside. I think there are a number of challenges, and there are 4 main challenges that I would like to highlight. The one which is potentially very revolutionary. If international trade and trade liberalization actually takes place, is the most strong political tool against authoritarian regime, because it will help basically in dismantling all the monopolistic system that the political elites, be their monarch, presidents, and their clients are controlling. Challenging the tariff and non-tariff barrier will contribute to set a blow to most authoritarian regimes in the region. There is, by the way, a very, and just to go in line what you said, you don't need European experts to tell you about Arab economies, but I went to a very interesting conference organized in Cairo last year by the Arab Reform Initiative on the public and private sector in the Arab world. And I think, and by the way, their study and the synthesis report of this conference, which I think very important in this moment, is available on the website of ARI, Arab Reform Initiative, where they point to the problem, where is the private, where is the public in the Arab world? And this is not a rhetoric question, it's a very concrete question if you think to who is in control of the economy and how changing the rules of the game in that sector could produce definitely important political changes. Second important issue, I think, is how the Arab world will be able or not to build up a regional cooperation mechanism. When you look worldwide, the Arab world is the only region in the world that since World War II has not been able, not that he has not been willing, I don't want to elaborate too much on that, but there is not a fully regional cooperation institution, economic cooperation institution. There is the Union for the Maghreb, there is the Gulf Cooperation Council. The core countries of the Arab world, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, they are not part of. So there I think there is another important challenge, and this in itself, and to echo what you said, how as an alternative to the relationship with international donors and the Western world, the Arab world itself could develop in terms of trade and economy an important alternative that has been lacking so far. Third challenge is the migration issue. And when I think to the migration issue, I don't think simply to Maghreb, Mashrek, and Europe, but again also in the Arab world. We know on the one side what has been the importance of inter-Arab migration during the oil boom era, but also how the social experience of migrants has been terribly negative. I will not develop on this. If you want in a discussion, just let me mention a beautiful book by an Egyptian author, Gamal Gitani. In the late 90s, he wrote a beautiful book on the experience of Egyptian workers in Iraq and the Gulf, showing basically how, again, the ideal of Arab unity died in the practice of migration and the experience, in the social experience of most Arab migrants. I think basically that the idea of circular migration should enter the field of discussion and cooperation. The vision of circular migration is the challenge that not only the Arab world, but especially the Arab world and European Union have to sit and discuss together. And the European Union, I speak as European, are not ready, and they are not ready even in a number of trade issues. The colleague, Mr. Mimouni, when he was pointing at agriculture, I don't believe, I really hope he's right, but I don't believe that the European Union is ready to put down the tariff barriers and the questions related to agriculture, and especially now, where three main agricultural countries in Europe, Portugal, Greece, and Spain, are suffering what they suffer. So this, I think, is to be seen another way. And last but not least, and I stop here, is what I think could be a tremendous change, both politically and economically, would be how to rethink the Arab-Israeli and Palestinian peace process. I was quite astonished to read the lady's, Mrs. Sophie, when pointed at the activities of trade, international trade in the occupied Palestinian territories. I really would like to know more, because I mean, it's maybe one of the countries of the Arab world that I know a little bit more or less worse than others, but the issue of international trade in Palestine is more than a provoking issue today. But again, let's look there at how the change in Egypt is setting new perspectives. Egypt, by opening the Gaza border, doesn't need to menace militarily Israel or whatever other things. But the potentiality for resetting the priorities for the peace process are there, and Egypt can play a key role. is beginning to stop doing the police for the Israelis over the Palestinians. The Jordanians will hopefully, they themselves also, with all my due respect to Jordan representative, give up ideas of unions with the West Bank or policing against indirectly for the Israelis. And hopefully, the Palestinian Authority also will stop policing its own populations for the Israelis. But they need help. And I think that when you think to the potentiality of a peace and the transformation of war economies into peace economies, the big dream we had 20 years ago is not yet lost. Is not yet lost. I hope that the peace process and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be integral part of the Arab Spring agenda in the changes, and I wish you all the best.